Шановні колеги, доброго ранку. Ми продовжуємо робочий день і зараз поговоримо на тему волонтерства.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's go on and speak about volunteers and taxation. We have Anastasiya Shymchuk, expert on legislation for NGOs, and Anastasia Krasnosilska, tax law expert. You have the floor. Good morning. My colleague and I came here having only one important reason to come. There are many NGO activists much concerned about 20% tax on volunteer activity, and we would like to undermine this myth. A couple of words about the volunteer law. This law has been adopted in 2011 to put all these guys in baseball caps supporting the soccer team for Euro 2012 to put them into legislation framework. This new law set the framework of the relations with the organizations, set the wages, and named them volunteers. But in 2013 and 2014, the volunteer activity covered almost 9 million people. All these citizens supporting our servicemen and displaced persons could not name themselves volunteers, otherwise they would violate the current law. Despite this funny situation, many volunteer organizations, including our center, started preparing the draft amendments to the law, and it was put in the form of 1408 draft law. Now we have some rumors that the situation has deteriorated because this new amendment sets 20% tax on volunteers, but the only basis for taxation is the tax code of Ukraine, and my colleague will speak about it. But what is good in this new amendment? First of all, the new draft law provided for cancellation of many registration requirements for volunteers. To name ourselves volunteers, we ought to enter organizations, then register this organization as such, and after that, organizations were forced to enter into agreements with us. The organizations had also the mandatory insurance for volunteers, and this was the legal basis for volunteer activity 1 year ago. According to the new amendment, these long procedures have been cancelled. Then, the new amendment allows us to be involved in volunteer activity as individuals, not entering any organizations, going to the meetings and so on. We can do good things ourselves. The new amendment provides for individual volunteer activity. And the third important point is that currently the volunteer activity is allowed starting from 14 years of age. I think he will support you that in this age the teenagers should be stimulated to making goods, and we must involve them in volunteer activity. Currently, teenagers can be volunteers. They can make drawings and pictures for our servicemen, make camouflage nets and so on. Another thing the mandatory insurance and mandatory agreements have been cancelled, and this I can see as a good point. There are questions about the good side of insurance, but please try and find any insurance company who agrees to insure the volunteers going to ATO area. I tried and everybody has refused. In current situation, a volunteer can come to a checkpoint and be asked about the insurance. So now this is optional, not mandatory. Another good thing is reimbursement to a volunteer who has been harmed or killed in the ATO area, which is also good. So now you can see that the statement on 20% taxation on volunteer activity is absurd. We, for instance, are going to go to the park and put the grass to the order. It's also volunteer activity, and I cannot see how it can be taxated. Now I give the floor to Anastasia Krasnosilska. Good morning, dear colleague, and let me make some comments about the taxation code. The taxation code is the only document, the only legislative base for tax obligations. The recent changes has been implemented in September 2014. Now let's come back to volunteer activity taxation. There is no such thing as volunteers for the taxation code. There are only individuals, companies, and NGOs, non-for-profit organization. What is important, if I am raising fund, it's important to understand what taxes are levied on the funds raised. The important thing is the taxation regime for people who are fundraising for ATO to their private accounts. These persons should be registered as ATO volunteers in a special registry kept by the Ministry of Finance of Ukraine, and upon their registration, these individuals who are raising funds, gathering them on their private bank accounts, would have tax incentives. If I am registered as ATO volunteer, all funds raised are not no taxes should be levied from these funds. Otherwise, it could have been considered income, and income tax should have been paid. But if I am registered as ATO volunteers, I am not obliged to pay taxes. When I give this money to displaced persons or servicemen harmed in ATO area, I also have some tax reductions. First of all, support to the displaced persons. It's the origin of the myth about 20% tax. If I am registered as ATO volunteer and I give any money to displaced persons, this money is not taxed before the amount given to one person reaches 1,200,000 hryvnias. This is the basic amount directed to temporarily displaced persons to settle onto their new spots. After that, if I give more than 1,200,000 hryvnias, the rest will be due to the tax, not the total amount, only the difference between the actual amount and $1,200,000 hryvnias. Well, yes, there could be some organizations stating that this is not enough, like for the case when the apartments, residential properties is given to the displaced person, it's not enough. But when we're talking about giving them some hygiene items, toys, food, clothes, $1,200,000 hryvnias a year is not so bad. So the tax regime is not so bad too. 20% tax is related only to the amounts over 1,200,000 hryvnias a year. Respectively, when we support the servicemen to buy protection items, food, uniform, hygiene items, or medical care, the total amount of this support is not due to taxes. And I can say that it's also a very good kind of tax regime. So this is the current taxation environment for volunteers, and we all understand that not the volunteering activity is due to tax, but the funds that we transfer to somebody else. And this 20% rate is used only to the amount over 1,200,000 hryvnias a year. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer. Please introduce yourself and ask your questions. I'm Victoria Boyko. Please specify 1,200,000 hryvnias for which period? A month? A year? And I cannot understand it. Anyway, if I have any money, somebody has paid tax already, so why should I pay 20% more? Well, let's clarify. If you as individual give your money to somebody else, first of all, you are not a taxation agent. Oh, well, okay, if I'm registered as a volunteer and somebody gives me money, transfers money for my account, what's the reason to pay anything else? The people who transfer me money have already paid 20% income tax, and now if I buy something, I pay VAT and so on. So if I give money to somebody else voluntarily, why should I pay anything? Okay, let's clarify. The taxation legislation is the law sector where we should be very specific to avoid creating myths. If you are a TO volunteer and you raise funds, you don't pay anything. This money is aimed to be transferred to displaced persons or to a TO. Actually, the cost related to fundraising is also not due to any taxes. Everything that you as a TO volunteers have raised and transferred is not due to any taxes. When we are talking about 1,200,000 hryvnias and so on, it's related to income tax, individual income tax. And this tax is to be paid by an individual who gets this money or the taxation agents. The taxation agents is an entity who must pay the income tax on my behalf. If this is a charitable organization, it's a taxation agent, and it takes this tax and transfers it to the tax authorities. If, for instance, I am a charitable organization and I transfer money to somebody, I must follow up the total amount, and if this total amount becomes higher than this $1,200,000 hryvnias, I must check it and pay taxes. If I am an individual getting the money as a charity, I must follow up, and as soon as the total is over 1,200,000 hryvnias, I must start paying. It's a little less because it's related to the minimum wage, which is 1,218 hryvnias, if I'm not wrong. So this 1,200,000 will grow as soon as the minimum wage grows. And this is per year. The individual income tax is currently as follows. If I get less than 12,180 hryvnias a month, the income tax rate is 15%, but if I get more, everything which is above 12,000 hryvnias is taxed at 20%. The difference is taxed as 20%. Speaking about 1,200,000 hryvnias, I have difficulties to envision how the situation can come to somebody getting more than this 12,000 hryvnias a month. Well, okay, I see. Let's imagine the situation. A disabled person who gets money for medical care, for prosthetics, it can amount to more than 1,200,000 a year. This is medical care support, which is separated from general income. The medical care aid is not subject to any taxation. When we are talking about monies subject to taxation, it's about the funds given for food, clothes, electric appliances, hygiene items, and so on. This is a kind of tax incentive because 1,200,000 hryvnias is exempt for taxation. But when we are talking about medical care, everything is exempt from taxes. Thank you. Next question, please. Clarification. Okay. Thank you very much, the expert, and hopefully volunteers will have in mind this information. Our